The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Karol Nawrocki, President of the Republic of Poland. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, I like and appreciate a lot English language, but I love Polish language, which epitomizes more than 1,000 years of Polish heritage, Polish culture and Polish history, so I would like to share with you Polish language. Szanowny
Distinguished Mr. President, Your Excellencies, esteemed delegates, I am standing here for the first time as President of the Republic of Poland. And of course, I feel great proud because of this. But at the same time, I'm aware of what serious challenges we are facing today as an international community. This is indeed so, for the world has changed completely over the last couple of years since the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. On February the 24th, 2022, we were brutally, all of us, awakened from our blissful dream of a world at the end of history. The history did not finish, and the history will not finish, and we need to be aware of that. So we were awakened from our blissful dream in which we strive for universal peace and respect for the principles of international law. I believe these are the words which are repeated more frequently in this community. This dream, ladies and gentlemen, does no longer exist, and we often repeat the words which do not reflect reality which surrounds us, both in Central Europe, in Eastern Europe, and in many other regions of the world from which you have come. State borders have ceased to be untouchable, as a matter of fact, and international law, which has so far been considered the compass of the world order, began to be treated more as a suggestion rather than a rule. Let me remind you that shortly after the outbreak of the war and the attack of the Russian Federation on Ukraine, Polish men and women demonstrated incredible solidarity with the fighting Ukrainian nation. We opened our hearts, our borders, we opened up our homes. We provided material, financial, and military assistance, as well as diplomatic one. Today, ladies and gentlemen, 1 million Ukrainian refugees live in Poland. Ladies and gentlemen, the Russian invasion of Ukraine is not only the most serious conflict in Europe since World War II, but it is also a turning point. The existing international order is crumbling before our eyes. The world has entered a new and dangerous era of rivalry between great powers, breaking rules and testing how far one can go before someone says a clear enough stop. The principle of sovereignty, you can ask this question, it is increasingly trampled upon, the prohibition of aggression reduced to a dead letter. Instead of law, an attempt to use naked and brutal force. We are at a turning point in history, a time when the decisions made today will have consequences for decades to come. And all of us need to be aware of this, and all of us are taking responsibility for this. That is why now, as a community of democratic states, or those aspiring to be democratic states, we must view the current situation as a battlefield for principles whose observance may determine the future of our civilization. Ladies and gentlemen, I think this is the last moment to take concrete action. Ladies and gentlemen, Russia's aggression against Ukraine is not just a regional conflict. It is a test of whether the principles on which the UN is based will stand the test of time, or whether they will succumb to the weight of the imperial and colonial ambitions of a state which considers itself above the law and which has repeatedly ignored the resolutions of the assembly, of this assembly, of other assemblies, and to a certain extent, all of us take responsibility for that. Further repeating the words about peace and security, which have to be spoken out loud, but which should be followed by concrete action. Moscow speaks of the need to address, and I quote, the root causes of the conflict. I share this view, but I believe that the root causes of Russian aggression are primarily ideological. Russia refers to an imperial vision that treats entire nations as a colonial property. It denies them subjectivity on a regular basis, claiming that they are artificial constructs, and it justifies the invasion as a historical correction. And ladies and gentlemen, in Poland, in Central Europe, in Eastern Europe, we know all of that. We have known it for at least 86 years. It is the same set of notions which appears also in the 21st century during our discussions, plenary sessions, and assemblies. To us in Central Europe and in Eastern Europe, this set of notions is nothing new. Whether we are talking about Poland, the Republic of Poland, in the first half of the 20th century, or whether we are talking about Ukraine today. As a historian, I view the present also through the lens of the past. That is natural. After centuries of conquests, wars, partitions, deportations, rapes, and crimes, in the 20th and in the 21st century, Russia has simply not abandoned its imperial ambitions. One of my great predecessors, the late President Lech Kaczynski, understood this perfectly well when he spoke in front of the Georgian parliament in 2008. His words, spoken at that time, have stood the test of time. President Lech Kaczynski said, ladies and gentlemen, today Georgia, tomorrow Ukraine, the day after tomorrow the Baltic states, and later, perhaps, it will be time for my country, for Poland. When Russia attacked Georgia, it was not clear to everyone that this was only the beginning of the Kremlin's new imperialism. Unfortunately, the wind of history, which we know and understand so well in Poland, is beginning to blow again. Once again, we are experiencing Russian imperialism also on our soil, in Poland. 2 weeks ago, on the night of September 9th to 10th, the Russian drones attacked the territory of a NATO member state, on the territory of Poland. A dozen or so drones violated my country's borders deliberately, because I assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that this was not a coincidence. It happened on orders issued in the capital of a country which is a permanent member of the Security Council. As a result, for the first time since World War II, Poland was forced to open fire on hostile objects over our territory. And rest assured, ladies and gentlemen, as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces and as President of Poland, that Poland will always react adequately and it stands ready to defend its territory. Poles, ladies and gentlemen, were not scared of the Soviets in 1920, and they defended the European civilization. They defended the Soviets in 1920. Polish people and the countries of Central Europe did not give up their spirit of freedom and sovereignty for 45 years of Soviet colonialism after 1945. And Polish people, as well as countries of Central and Eastern Europe, will not be scared of Russian drones either. But, ladies and gentlemen, this is not the point. The point is, how long are we going to agree to such acts of violating our international community? And that is precisely why, ladies and gentlemen, in Poland we're allocating significant amounts to develop our defense capabilities. That is why we are building the resilience of our country, but also of our part of Europe. Since the victims of similar provocations by Russia are also the Baltic states, our friends, the Estonians, for example, as well as Romania. As a leader in the region, we are working to strengthen the close ties among the Bucharest 9 countries. And that is why we are developing cooperation within the 3Cs initiative. As the voice of the region, we emphasize that we do not consent to Moscow's ruthless acts of provocation against us and other European nations, testing our reactions and intimidating our societies. We do not agree to that. Distinguished delegates, neo-imperial and neo-colonial Russia is attempting to destroy the architecture of international security before our eyes. It violates international law, reinforces divisions, and strives to revive the concert of powers. Many countries present in this hall today are well aware of the tragedy of borders drawn by force and decisions taken over the heads of nations. Historical experiences, often so difficult for my country, shows that lasting peace cannot be built on rewarding aggression. We cannot agree to territorial integrity and sovereignty being violated. Russia's current actions do not indicate a willingness to pursue genuine peace, declarations of dialogue, and this is something we know as well, are accompanied by military offensives and more attacks, with victims being civilians, including children. Always when Moscow says peace, what it actually means is surrender of the one who it considers its enemy. Russia needs to end the war and accept full responsibility for it. Holding Russia accountable should be our common duty. The perpetrators of all international crimes must be tried before competent courts. And I hope this is going to be the case soon, and that we are going to meet in the coming years, also during my presidency, and discuss things which should be obvious for all of us. That is why Poland supports the work of the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court, and endorses the idea of establishing a special ad hoc tribunal to try the perpetrators of aggression. For no war can be profitable for the aggressors. Wars cannot pay off to the aggressors, also in terms of economy. States and nations deserve full compensation also from those who started the Second World War. Because if we want to build a community of states, of democratic states, a common European Union, then we have to agree together that war must not pay off in terms of economy to any aggressor. Ladies and gentlemen, as I mentioned, we are currently facing a whole range of global and local challenges. The eyes of the world, and ours too, are currently looking at the Middle East. Poland, like many other countries in the world, is following with concern the situation in this region, in the Middle East, where, as a result of the brutal attacks by Hamas on October the 7th, 2023, the conflict has escalated. Israel, like any other country, has the right to self-defense. Actions undertaken by Israel, however, must comply with international law, including international humanitarian law. Poland continues to advocate for a two-state solution to the conflict in the Middle East, in such a way as to give both the Palestinians and the Israelis the right to live in peace and security. Poland consistently supports international efforts to improve the situation in the Middle East and calls on the UN to take action. Ladies and gentlemen, Poland has no colonial past, which is why we are a reliable and trustworthy partner for Asian and African countries. What is more, we ourselves, we Poles, were victims of colonial policies pursued by superpowers, so we understand perfectly well the instruments used by neo-imperial powers, and we do not consent to them destabilizing certain regions of the world. As President of the Republic of Poland, I will pay particular attention to developing our cooperation with various regions of the world. I'm referring to the African continent. We can all see how the ongoing wars, conflicts, and terrorist attacks undermine the efforts of proud African nations to live and develop in safe and just conditions. The world must stand with all those affected by insecurity and help them restore peace. We do not consent to neo-imperial powers destabilizing, for instance, the Sahel, in order to arbitrarily manage global migration flows or apply migratory pressure. Nor do we consent to international criminal groups profiting from human trafficking and slave labor. We also want, and it is obvious as Poland, to develop relations with the countries of Asia and the Pacific. The role of this region in shaping the international order in the 21st century has significantly grown. This dynamic economic development is, however, accompanied by growing geopolitical tensions, which affects stability, prosperity, and security also in other regions of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, as Polish people, we are concerned about the negative impact of global crises. But as President of Poland, I want to say openly here in front of this international community that we are also deeply concerned and we are aware of the mistakes made by our Western partners, friends, and neighbors. Yes, I agree with President Donald Trump that in recent years, and that is something that we were warning against as Poles, and this was the signal sent also by Central European countries, Eastern European countries. Europe is deep in ideological madness. This led to bad decisions on migration. This led to green craziness, green madness, the Green Deal, which is destroying economic markets and also agricultural markets. Yes, the very same Europe, our friends and our partners with whom we want to build a common European Union. For many years, we're subsidizing the Russian Federation buying Russian cheap gas. Ladies and gentlemen, in Poland as well as in Central Europe, we know all of that, and we are glad whenever the leaders of the European countries, Western European countries, draw conclusions and when they listen to our voice. Ladies and gentlemen, development and humanitarian aid are an integral part of our country's foreign policy in terms of building global peace, security, and development. We see it as a joint investment in our future, security, stability, and prosperity. We are present with our support in many areas in Africa, in Eastern Europe, and in the Middle East. Distinguished delegates, Poland, a co-founder of the United Nations, is the world's 20th largest economy, and a country which has successfully transformed itself over the past 30 years from a developing country into a developed country and from a centrally planned economy into a market economy. This unique experience allows us to make a significant contribution to UN discussions on development, combining the perspectives of the Global East and the Global West, as well as North and South. Given our potential and experience, we consistently seek to participate in the works of the G20, a format that serves as a bridge in these turbulent times. We also hope that the invitation to cooperate and to participate in the next summit of the group, issued by the United States of America, for which I'm grateful to President Donald Trump, will translate into Poland's permanent presence in this community. Ladies and gentlemen, human rights are one of the three main pillars on which the United Nations system is based. We cannot talk about true peace if we do not protect human rights of everyone, of every person without exception. Peace is not only an absence of armed conflicts, it is also justice, equality, and respect for human dignity. Therefore, the protection of human rights must be a priority in any process of building peace and security. We can clearly see dramatic consequences of the Russian aggression, also in terms of human rights and humanitarian issues. Our priority, the priority of Poland, of Polish people, is also the situation of human rights in Belarus. We must firmly defend human rights also in the most fundamental dimension. I'm speaking about the right to life of the defenseless, from conception to natural death. We are protecting our families as the place of happiness, love, and bringing up children. We are speaking up as Poland in a loud voice for one of the most persecuted groups in the world, Christians. We consider the Human Rights Council to be the main human rights body within the United Nations system, playing a key role in ensuring compliance with human rights standards. That is why Poland has submitted its candidacy for membership of the Human Rights Council for the period 2029-2031. Our candidacy reflects our commitment to promoting and protecting human rights around the world. Distinguished Mr. President, Your Excellencies, esteemed delegates, the United Nations was established 80 years ago. This anniversary shows how far we have come, but also how many challenges still lie ahead. Today we know that international cooperation is not an option, it is a necessity for all of us. It is unacceptable that aggressors begin to march with impunity through other people's territories and perpetrators of war crimes sleep peacefully without accountability every day. Let me remind you that after World War II, there was no room for relativizing crimes, at least in case of the most important commanders who gave orders. There was Nuremberg. There was a court, there was a name and a family name, there was a charge and a sentence, because it was not just about revenge, it was about principles, and today it's also about principles to make sure that crime is not rewarded and that the law is never replaced by force. Today, we must return to that spirit. We must build an international system of accountability that will not hesitate to call evil by its name, regardless of the flag it bears on its shoulder. We must make it clear there are borders, there are human rights, there is international law, and anyone who violates it should face severe consequences. But it is not going to happen by itself, ladies and gentlemen, for the world order is not given once and for all. It depends precisely on us, on the governments, institutions, but most importantly, on societies. As one of the Nobel Peace Prize laureates once said, neutrality helps the oppressor always, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Let these words be not just a warning, but also a call to action. To action here and now. Thank you for your attention.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Poland.